And many of us have never witnessed a coronation in the UK. It has been decades, so there are, of course, many questions about how it will all play out. So for more on this, we've reached Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. He's a royal historian and broadcaster. He joins us now from London. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you again.
To start, Rafe, can you give us a sense of the mood, of what the mood is like in London as we lead up to the coronation?
Well, it's quite interesting. You know, in the immediate aftermath of the Queen's death, and indeed, I suppose, for some years before, people at the palace and elsewhere there was a degree of consternation about how the public would react to the coronation of the King, given his difference in popularity levels with the Queen. And what's been interesting to see is from the moment of his accession until now, there's been a steady growth in support for the King. And so we've just had a new poll out recently in the last week, the biggest poll since the death of the Queen. And it shows support for the King at its highest level for decades. And I've been based outside Buckingham Palace with the media camp. I'm sure CBC is a couple of tents over from where I've been. But I've been there since Tuesday. And every day you're seeing more and more people come, even though the coronation hasn't happened. There's nothing to see, but this spirit has become infectious and everyone is coming down and it's a happy mood. The roads are all closed and it's almost like the beginning of a carnival atmosphere. So I think coronation fever, it took a while to kick in, but it's now very much alive and well.
And you know, Rafe, we also want to take a look at the traditions here, because earlier this week, King Charles made a decision to change one of the traditions of the coronation of a new monarch. And instead of hereditary peers swearing an oath to him when he's crowned, he's asked that the public take on that role. The homage of peers will now be the homage of people. So what do you make of that? How do you think people will react?
Well, I'm a traditionalist, so I'm naturally opposed to changes to the coronation. I lament the end of the hereditary peers and the members of the House of Lords paying homage. I think that could easily have been kept. But the idea here didn't come from the King, actually. It came from the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lambeth Palace. And the idea was to try to be as inclusive as possible and allow everyone in the United Kingdom and in Canada and Australia and New Zealand to all participate in the coronation of their king. Because a coronation is a contract. It's a contract between the sovereign and his peoples. And Charles is, of course, King of Canada and King of Australia separately to being King of the United Kingdom. Rather than just limiting that contract to those people inside the Abbey, the idea was to take it beyond the walls voluntarily as an invitation. Anybody who wished to could return the oath. The King will take an oath, but a contract requires two parties, and the public have an opportunity to play their part in reciprocating and say that in exchange for your service, we will give you our loyalty. I think it was a nice idea. I just think that it was badly communicated. A lot of people thought they were being asked to take an oath when the King wasn't. And of course, in this country, in Britain particularly, we're not very used to being patriotic and wearing a flag on the sleeve, so to speak. Not like in America, for example, where children pledge allegiance every day to a flag. But I think, you know, once every 70 years or 20 years is the usual span of a coronation. I don't think there's much to ask, say, children. I don't really mind adults so much, but I think for children it will be a good way to learn about the Crown and the Constitution.
Now, perhaps as a traditionalist, this might be challenging, but we know that change is inevitable, and some experts have predicted that Charles' reign will be one defined by change. So how do you think that will play out? What changes do you think we could see in the coming months and years?
Well, we're seeing also in the coronation service an attempt again to reflect the modernity of Britain and the Commonwealth realm, and indeed of the Commonwealth more broadly. I should point out, if you come to London, normally if people will be familiar with the Union flags decking both sides of the Mall leading up to Buckingham Palace. Well, on this occasion, we actually have all of the Commonwealth realms too, in order of seniority, Canada being the most senior, then Australia and New Zealand. During the coronation service, it still remains a Christian service, but you also have, for example, peers representing Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Sikhism, and also the Greek Orthodox Church has a presence there too. And there's a deaf signing choir participating in the choral music as well. So, actually had a concert the following day. So efforts are being made. This is a sustainable coronation. Costumes are being reused, chairs are being reused. You know, the King has been championing so many of the causes which today are at the cutting edge of where we are. But in the 80s and 90s, when he was really advocating organic farming and sustainability, people regarded him as an eccentric. So I think he's very much a man, a king for the 21st century. And I think people just need to actually learn and appreciate how devoted he is to causes which I think most of the public actually support and agree with.
Now, Rafe, you did point out off the top that the favorability and popularity of King Charles is actually growing in the UK, but we know that the popularity of the King and the royal family has waned in recent years in Canada. Polling, for example, from the Angus Reid Institute indicates 52% of Canadians don't want their country to continue as a constitutional monarchy for generations to come. So what does the royal family need to do to stay relevant? And you pointed out, of course, the focus on climate may be one of those things.
Absolutely. I should say I'm also a Canadian citizen. I grew up in Canada, went to school and university. I'm a trustee of the Canadian Royal Heritage Trust. So I do understand the Crown and Canada very well. And over the past 30 years of looking at the role of the Crown in Canada, what's been clear is that over the last decade, there's been the government has really done its best, I should say, to minimise the visibility of the monarchy to Canada. We've seen a decline in the number of royal visits. The problem is that the monarchy has to be seen, and to be seen to be doing good. If the monarchy if the Crown never comes to Canada, it's understandable why people don't see its relevance. But it's up to the Canadian government to invite the royal family. They don't arrive uninvited. And what we saw, for example, last year with the Platinum Jubilee visit to Canada was that it was barely a 3-day trip. It was actually only one full day. They arrived on the 17th of May, left on the 19th of May. For the Platinum Jubilee, normally those trips are 7 days. And this trip was to Newfoundland and to the Northwest Territories, almost keeping the royal family out of the populated parts of the nation. Last year, Canada did not, for the first time ever, Canada didn't produce a Platinum Jubilee medal. Now, the opposition parties wanted that to be done. We've had a Golden Jubilee, Diamond Jubilee, Coronation medal. That would have been a wonderful way, for example, for the Crown to recognise people who fought COVID, from emergency services to doctors and so forth. That's the presence of the Crown. That was denied. It doesn't seem as if they're going to be doing a coronation medal this year either. The provinces actually rebelled, and last year the provinces took it upon themselves to produce Platinum Jubilee medals. How disappointed they were with that. So it's if you can't blame a society for not supporting the monarchy if they aren't taught it in their schools, and if there is no occasion where publicly the Crown is allowed to play its fundamental role. You have to remember, the Canadian monarchy is actually older as a continuous monarchy than it is in Britain. Canada's always been a monarchy. In England, we had a republic for 11 years, from 1649 to 1660. Canada was under the French monarchy at the time. So Canada has known nothing else but monarchy, and it's been under a monarchy that Canada has been able to develop into one of the world's most successful, most democratic, most egalitarian, and most prosperous nations. I don't see it as a hindrance.
And certainly there are a lot of questions surrounding that too, and the history of Canada within this country, or the history of the royal family within this country, and a lot to explore there. Thank you for your time, Rafe. That is Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. He is a royal historian and broadcaster. We reached him in London.